Okay, let's do this. All right. Ooh, too loud again. Okay, let's get started here. Lots to do this week, but I think we will have time to get through globalization. We got a little bit of stuff to talk about. Before we get to that, we just have a few slides left. You know, people keep making this joke. It's really mean. It's use bar soap on the top of my head and lather, rinse, don't bother repeating, because why would you? So mean. You're also mean. You all failed this course now. Have fun with your GPAs. I'm going to have to explain to the dean how a class of 130 engineers all failed this course, but I'm willing to do that just because I'm mad. No, I'm kidding. Okay, a couple of quick concepts to cover. I want to do this really fast so we can move on to globalization. I know the time is short. Okay, so Ulrich Beck in 1992 writes a book called The Risk Society. And basically, if you want to understand what Beck is talking about in very brief terms, he suggests that the trends we've been talking about, shift to flexible labor markets, and we'll talk about labor markets a little bit later, but particularly things like part-time work, temporary jobs, less pay, less security, more precarious employment, shifts away from this lifelong, the trend where you used to work for one corporation for most of your life, has shifted a lot of things in terms of the risk in society. So what he suggests is, basically that we've seen the individualization of risk. So all of the things that can go wrong in life, right? Unexpected illness, unexpected children, job losses, all of those things used to be sort of covered by, things like the social safety net. Education, right? The need for more credentials. There used to be greater, skills training and more kind of support for people getting those skills. And what he suggests is a lot of that has basically gone away. So where it used to be that the state helped us mitigate a lot of the risk, right? Especially from the period like 1945 to 1975, increasingly all that risk sits on you, the individual, right? And this comes from, more varied paths through the life course, right? There's more ways to move through life. There's not a single kind of script of how you live a good life or get a great job or any of those things, and more global competition. But it means increasingly the state is less willing and less able to shield people. So the risk is all on you, right? You end up having to take on a lot of the risk for yourself. Okay, and last couple of topics. All right. One of the other suggestions that we see a lot in the literature is that, especially as we've moved into service, right? The service industry being the biggest employer of most people in the West, increasingly people have to take on what's called emotional labor, right? So you're doing feelings work, basically managing emotions at work. There are feelings rules. I don't know if it's still the case at McDonald's, when they had the physical boards where they had to put the prices up and they couldn't change it with those annoying digital displays where you're trying to order something and you're like, wait, I want to order that thing, but it's gone now. They used to have at the bottom, the smiles are free, right? And the idea was that everybody at McDonald's was supposed to be smiling all the time. But, certainly I've worked in customer service jobs, places like Enterprise Rent-A-Car, where there were a lot of rules as to, how you were supposed to greet people, what kind of tone you were supposed to be, and a lot of tone policing. And think of anytime you've talked to a customer service agent on the phone, right? And you hear that this call may be recorded for quality assurance purposes. It's not for quality assurance purposes. It's in part to make sure they're following all these kinds of feeling rules, right? Empathizing with you and following the correct scripts. So, because you can't, even if a customer is yelling at you, and certainly, we've all felt like yelling at the TELUS agent at some point. You're supposed to say, "I'm really sorry you feel that way, sir." Right? Even if they're yelling at you and calling you foul names and all these sorts of things. Okay, so there's surface acting versus deep acting. Surface acting, I think you get, right? Some people just kind of put it on. They have the happy demeanor at work, but it's very surface level. For some people, it can actually get a little bit deeper, right? Where they take on the qualities that their employer tells them. And sometimes, right, both of these can lead to emotional dissonance or self-estrangement at work, where the feelings you're supposed to project don't match your real feelings. And so you're, how shall we say, feeling a little bit out of sorts, right? There's a dissonance and estrangement and alienation from how you're supposed to be feeling. And then, of course, there's we can split this into the emotional proletariat and the privileged emotional managers, right? Those frontline workers that have to deal with people's emotions, especially in jobs where heightened emotions happen, or, any kind of customer service position, versus kind of, privileged emotional managers, people who are higher up in the echelon and get to order people on how they're supposed to be behaving. Okay, and increasingly, there is what's been called moving beyond kind of the employer-employee dyad, right? So it used to be, what was important was this relationship here between employer and employee. But with the service industry becoming kind of critical, and you get this idea the customer's always right. Increasingly, right, there's a relationship between the employer, the worker, and the customer, where things kind of move in different directions and they're each kind of responsible to each other in different ways. So that move with adding the customer has complicated people's work in a lot of cases. Okay, and last one for theories and concepts, and then we'll move on to globalization here. Increasingly work has become more mobile. And there's a whole bunch of ways that this is true, right? Some, flow between countries, right? Transnational caregivers, and, if we're talking Canada, temporary foreign workers or TFWs have become a major feature of a lot of industrialized economies, right? Canada today has somewhere around, we don't actually know exactly, but it's probably somewhere between 4.5 and 6 million temporary foreign workers, some of whom overstayed their visas and are now here illegally. But it is a lot. Okay, you also have, flows between people within countries. It used to be, and I think it still is, with something like the oil sands, people were coming into Alberta from all over the place. The Maritimes, Newfoundland in particular, coming to work in the oil sands. And for a period, I don't know if it's still true because it's been a while since I checked in with the oil sands. There were chartered flights from St. John's, Newfoundland, to Fort McMurray, right? Or often to private airstrips run by oil companies where they were flying workers in for 11-day or 14-day shifts and then flying them back to Newfoundland at the end. So there's a lot of, employment-related mobility. And of course, increasingly, right, we have like our work from home and telework after COVID, which has really changed the game as well and allowed people like my neighbors, lovely people. They moved here from Vancouver about 3 years ago. They still work for an office in Vancouver, but they moved to Edmonton, right, because both the parents, the kid obviously doesn't work, but both the parents work from home, right? So they were teleworking, and they basically did what a lot of other people do, and they're like, hey, I can buy, a massive house in Edmonton with a great backyard, lots of amenities for, $600,000, or I could buy a shoebox in Vancouver for 3.8 million. And they make that kind of logical determination. So lots of that happening as well. So increasingly, right, we have so much impact of all of these things. Outsourcing, of even high-skilled jobs to places like India. Increasingly, sorry to tell you this, I had a friend who ran an engineering firm, and even though he's an Alberta engineer, he outsourced a lot of his engineering to a firm in Delhi because they were, I think he said, about 30 cents on the dollar compared to hiring an engineer here. And somehow this firm was like registered and okay with a PEGA, which I always felt was, not the greatest, but there you go. So lots of this stuff is kind of changing how work is done. Okay, do I have a last question slide on here? Yes, but no one asked a question. Okay, I'm gonna take half a second here. Slightly more than half a second. I'm gonna switch to my globalization slides. And then I just have to fix the live stream so that it is recording the right things. Okay. It has the right things, but it's very small. Okay, well, we're fixed. Okay. So we're going to shift gears here, and we're going to talk about one of the major kind of changes in the way labor is distributed. We've already been hinting at it, and obviously this is globalization. Okay, so as I know it's been a while since we switched slide decks. The slide deck now has a new Slido code because every single one has a different one. So here, right, you're at 1069.296. Or scan that QR code if you want to ask questions. I'll give you half a sec to do that while I sip my coffee. And then I want to play this. Probably won't, we will play most of it, and we'll keep going from there.
Rolling. I'm Alex Bloomberg at Planet Money, and a while ago we had this idea. Make a t-shirt and then follow that shirt around the world as it gets made. This right here?
Okay. I will try one technical thing, and then otherwise we might have to come back to it next time. Sometimes this gets... Oops, that's the wrong thing to do. Sideways on me. Okay.
This is the shirt we made. And it's just an ordinary shirt. It's not made of organic cotton. It's not handmade in the United States. We wanted to tell the story of our clothes the way the vast majority of our clothes are actually made. Because behind all of our clothes, behind this shirt, there is an entire world. And once you see that world, you realize there's nothing ordinary about a simple t-shirt. Our t-shirts started here, or near here anyway, on a cotton farm in the Mississippi Delta. America, it turns out, exports more cotton than any other country in the world. For about a century, America maintained its cotton dominance by using slave labor. Today, it does so using technology.
This is a John Deere app, and it shows where the pickers and tractors are. We can go into the screen on a picker and see what the picker driver is actually seeing on his screen.
Sure, it's picking the cotton off the snow.
So we're driving south?
Yeah.
Bowen Flowers is a third-generation Mississippi cotton farmer. Even the seeds he uses are a feat of engineering to rival the iPhone. Most American cotton seeds are made in a lab, like this one and the Monsanto Corporation. Genes from bacteria are added to the cotton to make it more pest-resistant and tolerant of herbicides. There's a debate over the safety of genetically modified crops. For American cotton farmers, though, it's mainly been settled. 20 years ago, there was no GM cotton. Today, over 90% of American cotton is genetically modified. And all this technology, the machines that automatically bale the cotton, the specially designed trucks to haul those bales away, the high-speed gins that remove those lab-designed seeds, all this technology has an impact. Since the 1950s, cotton yields have almost tripled.
You've been harvesting all this cotton. How many T-shirts did you make?
Oh gosh, it's no telling. Do y'all happen to know that answer? How many it is?
We didn't know, but we went back and looked it up. The answer? From just this one farm, in just 1 year, there's enough cotton for 9 million T-shirts. That's a T-shirt for every single person in New York City. Our cotton leaves the United States and goes around the world to Colombia, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, where it goes from plant to fabric, with barely a human being involved. Just lots and lots of cool machines, which we set to music. Our cotton first went to spinning factories like this one. Raw cotton is sucked up, laid down in big sheets, straightened, pulled into long, feathery ropes, like an infinite ponytail. And with a final twist, it becomes yarn. It's then sent on big spools to the next step, the circular knitting machine, where our yarn is turned into fabric. It's washed, dyed, and voila, the fabric for our shirts. Soft, comfy, and a high-tech engineering marvel. Our men's T-shirt was made here, in this factory, in Bangladesh. Here's one of the people who made it.
এরপরে মিলানোর পরে সোল্ডার করবে আবার লগে এখানে টপ স্টিচ হবে একটা
Our women's T-shirt was made here, in this factory, in Colombia.
¿Cómo hizo para conseguirla? La punta es lo más importante de la camiseta. Es lo que le da la apariencia a la camisa.
Doris and Jasmine share a job, but they're separated by the economic realities of the countries they live in. Bangladesh is much poorer than Colombia. And the role the garment industry plays in Bangladesh, the role of our T-shirts, is very different. Jasmine Akhtar lives with her brother, sister-in-law, and roommate in a tiny rooming house. There's no running water, just a gas stove to cook. There's a small TV and a bookcase that holds all her belongings. She leaves for work at 7 a.m. each day, 6 days a week. She makes one of the lowest wages in the world, about $80 a month. Jasmine has been working in clothing factories since she was 16 years old. And she is not alone. 4 million people in Bangladesh work in the garment industry. It's double the number from a decade ago. Which raises a question. What has driven 4 million people to work long hours in these factories for some of the lowest wages in the world? To answer that question, we went back with Jasmine to the village where she grew up.
কেউ ভালো সুস্থভাবে চলা অবস্থায় কেউ কখনো গার্মেন্টসে যাবে না কারণ আমি যেরকম আসছি এরকম সবাই
A lot of garment workers come from villages like Jasmine's, where people worry about getting enough food to eat and sometimes don't, and where girls are seen as an economic burden. The solution? Find a husband with the means to support your daughter. But finding a good husband costs money, a dowry. In Jasmine's family, her older sister's dowry sent the family into debt.
আমাদের থেকে ঋণ পাবে প্রতিদিন ঘরে আসবে একটা লোক তখন আমার ভিতরে একটা জিদ আসছে যে কিরে আমরা তো ঘরে আছি বেগার, আমরা কেন থাকবো, আমরা শহরে গেলে তো অনেক টাকা ইনকাম করতে পারবো। তখন আমার জিদে আমি শহরে গেছি, যাওয়ার পরে আমি চাকরি করে মা বাবাকে টাকা দিচ্ছি, হেল্প করছি আর কি, যাই আস্তে আস্তে সব ক্লিয়ার হয়ে দিচ্ছি।
This was Jasmine's trade-off. Long hours, a monotonous low-wage job. But in a factory, she says, that feels safe, better than others she's worked in. An improvement, however slight, over a life of even more crushing poverty in her village. In the middle of our t-shirt project, the worst garment industry disaster in history happened in Bangladesh. The factory collapse at Rana Plaza. Suddenly, the world was considering questions that we'd been considering. Who are the people that make our clothes? What are their lives like? More than 1,000 people died that day. They died seeking the same things that Jasmine was seeking. A few more calories in their diet, the chance maybe to pay off a debt. They died, in other words, trying to make the same trade-off that Jasmine had, a life of extreme poverty for one slightly better off. Our women's t-shirt was made in a country with a much more advanced economy, Colombia. Things there are different. Doris Restrepo lives there with her mother in a small apartment. And she supports the two of them on the salary she earns at the factory where our shirts were made.
Me imagino que las personas que van a usar esa camiseta son personas de Estados Unidos, gringos, gordos. Me imagino a las personas gordas porque las camisetas que hacemos así como inmensas. Y ahí sabemos que es para personas gigantes.
Doris makes almost 4 times what Jasmine makes in Bangladesh and can imagine a life outside the garment industry. Doris has a small side business selling pastries door to door and dreams of one day opening her own business.
Pienso que si Dios quiere y todo me sale bien para este año, es el último en mi profesión.
In Colombia, the garment industry is just an industry. But in Bangladesh, it's a social upheaval. Millions of women like Jasmine living lives that just 20 years ago would have been hard to imagine. Lives filled with new risks and new possibilities. Most of the money Jasmine earns at the factory, she sends home to her family. But she keeps about $10 a month for herself, for food, or maybe an impulse purchase on her one day off a week. We talked to both labor activists and factory owners about the impact of our t-shirt on the lives of people in Bangladesh. Is our shirt providing opportunities for people like Jasmine, or is it taking advantage of a desperate population? Both the activists and the owners told us the same thing, that the worst possible outcome from tragedies like the factory collapse at Rana Plaza would be for the garment industry to leave Bangladesh altogether. What they don't agree on, what they're fighting about right now, what more needs to be done to improve the lives of workers in Bangladesh? And what does it all have to do with the price of our t-shirt? Our t-shirts got from the factories in Colombia and Bangladesh back home to us in this, a shipping container. This one right there, that's ours. And containers are the unsung innovation that makes the global economy possible. Containers came on the scene in the 1960s, and they made shipping, which used to be a huge pain in the ass, much more efficient. The container is loaded onto our ship, captained by this guy. The ship leaves Colombia. A week later, it arrives in Miami. Our container with our shirts inside then gets loaded back onto a truck, and then onto a train, where it makes its way north. And this whole journey, thousands of miles, ships, trains, and trucks, cost just pennies per shirt. I tiny fraction of the cost of the raw materials in our shirt. Far less than the cost to print the design on our shirt. And a drop in the bucket compared to what it costs our shirts to take the final leg of their journey, from our warehouse to you. So here's to you, shipping container, the humble hero of the global economy.
¿Y qué le crees que le gustaría, o qué te gustaría a ti, que esa gente que está comprando?
I'm Alex Bloomberg. In this whole journey, fraction of the cost of the raw materials, the final leg of their journey, from our warehouse. Here's to you, shipping container.
¿Qué te gustaría a ti, que esa gente que está comprando esta camiseta, que sepa de ti? ¿Qué te gustaría que ellos...
¿Qué hay detrás de esta camiseta? Sí, un mundo.
Oopsie, sound fixed now. Thank you. Is it still too zoomed in? Oh no. What happened? Okay. My bad. Fixied. I don't know why OBS does that. I've tried other pieces of software, but they don't work as well. So, all right, I fixed it. I'm sorry. Is the cutoff for the first midterm? So hopefully the cutoff for the midterm will be globalization. We're careening towards it super fast. Okay, very quickly. Hopefully you can hear me now and all that's good. I'm sorry you didn't get all that, but we'll go forward. Okay, so compression of space and time, basically through technology, right? Starting with, if we go back to like the 16th century, sailing ships that were faster than, steamships, eventually, diesel-powered ships, all things that got faster, global communications, first the telegraph, then the phone, then satellites, then the internet, have shrunk the world, right? And of course, the fastest way to get around, the airplane, has made the world a much smaller place. So, technology has compressed time and space. Voyages, if you wanted to sail from, or to get from England to India back in, 1750, it would have taken you months, right? This is a months-long journey. Today, obviously, you can fly from London to Delhi in less than a day. So we've compressed time and space in major ways. The internet and electronic technologies obviously make the world a much smaller place, allow you to interact with people from all over the world, manage global corporations, like you're managing, a store 5 blocks from your house. You can manage all of these things centrally because you can communicate across borders and instantaneously. Yeah, air travel makes multinational business more feasible, as does the shipping container, right? Shipping is very efficient. Ports are not efficient, but shipping is very efficient. And yeah, cultures now are, more and more frequently in contact, and they have deeper and longer interactions, through people traveling, but also immigration, right? Having grown up in the 80s and 90s, I can tell you there are way better restaurants in Edmonton today from any culture that you want than there were in the past, right? I don't think as a kid I ever would have dreamed of Ethiopian cuisine, but it's quite good. I think there's 2 or 3 Ethiopian restaurants in Edmonton today. Okay, and tangible goods increasingly are becoming secondary to non-tangible ones, right? So again, services, software, although, physical things still matter quite a bit. Okay, 12 minutes. I could do lots of slides. I just need to be in position to finish all the slides for this section on Wednesday. Okay, so following the collapse of the USSR, right, the Soviet Union, USSR, basically, for all intents and purposes, sort of capitalism particularly, and to a lesser extent, liberal democracy, were seen as the uncontested masters of the world. And this fellow, Francis Fukuyama, wrote a book called The End of History, right? In this quote, what we may be witnessing is not the end of the Cold War, but the end of history as such, that is, the end point of man's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy. So he wrote that in the 1990s. This has now become a kind of thesis that's clowned on a little bit, because obviously, China has not become a liberal democracy, nor really has Russia. And certainly, if you look at the Middle East is still dominated by autocracies in some way, shape, or form. Most of them capitalist, but not liberal democracies. So at least half of his thesis seems to have been incorrect. Neoliberalism, was kind of dominant in the West following, up to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it has continued its ascendancy, right? This kind of free market ideology, really embodied by Washington, has become the sort of dominant way of doing things and has been enforced on people through American-led institutions, not the WHO, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund in particular, that have basically forced countries to restructure along neoliberal lines if they want loans from the US and European Union. And to some extent, we've seen the decline of the welfare state, right? It's becoming harder and harder to sustain. You know, a lot of the welfare state in Canada and Europe has been sort of sustained at the cost of the American taxpayer, basically paying for their defense. You know, Canada spends, I think, only about 1% of GDP on defense, and we rely on our American friends and neighbors to defend us. That is probably coming to an end, and we're going to see further declines in the welfare state. So don't get too used to the idea that the government's going to give you $10 a day childcare, because I strongly suspect that program will not last. Oh, and don't expect an old age pension. Save your money. Don't assume you're going to get CPP. I'm not assuming I'm going to get CPP. And you're all, 20 years younger than I am. So, all right, cultural concerns. Okay, we're 11 of 20 some. Cultural concerns. Lots of fear, especially in the early Cold War period, about the universalization of culture, especially that American culture would come to basically take over the entire world, right? Sometimes referred to as cultural imperialism, right? Or basically US Hollywood firms, and to a lesser extent the British, going around and selling movies and television shows all over the world to other countries, and essentially sort of selling them at such low cost that local producers can't compete. And the equation was always basically that you make back your budget in the US and Canada, and then you sell, your Avengers movies or whatever. I guess it's budget. I spelled it wrong. I'm sorry. Budget. You sell your, Hollywood movies, television shows, basically almost at a loss globally, or basically just at cost, but it sort of makes it hard for other places to actually produce their own cultural products. So what you get, inevitably, is wherever you are in the world, and if you've traveled anywhere, you know that you could go to Mexico, you could go to China, you could go probably anywhere in Europe, and what would you find playing, on overhead speakers everywhere? Right, you'd hear Taylor Swift. Why? Because she's a global phenomenon. And people are increasingly all over the world buying the same things. Some standard products sold all over the world, right? You can get a Big Mac anywhere McDonald's is, which is almost everywhere. And, this is my favorite term. It's not really in wide use, but I continue to use it because it's super fun to write and to say. Coca-Colanization and McDonald'sization. Coca-Cola is one of those too. Coca-Cola, you can get virtually everywhere on Earth other than like North Korea. You can buy Coca-Cola. At one point, you could buy it in Afghanistan. I think it might not be there anymore. Oh, and Russia. But we'll talk about Russia in a minute. You have to get Dobry Cola in Russia, but that's another story. Okay. Yeah, and a lot of fears, that the spread of globalization would lead to the decline of these very unique local cultures. Okay, can I do free trade agreements? Talk about Canada. So really, I guess this is now 3, though I kind of count the first 2 as the same. Canada has been a part of now essentially 3 free trade agreements. The original free trade agreement with the US, signed in 1989, which basically just took down not all, but many of the trade barriers between Canada and the United States, so the goods would be sold without tariffs, right? Mexico was added to this agreement in 1993, the agreement signed in 1993. It's implemented in 1994. Generally, there was a huge fear that it would be super destabilizing for Canada and the US because Mexico would, basically, how shall we say, eat our lunch with cheap labor. So it would lead to rapid deindustrialization in Canada and the US. This has not necessarily been entirely the case. Mexico has certainly grown their manufacturing sector. Mexico does a lot of things really well. They have relatively high skilled workers. The skill of workers in Mexico is actually generally agreed to be higher than those in China. So we've seen some job losses in certain industries, especially automotives, right? Car manufacturing, a lot of it has shifted over to Mexico. But in a lot of ways, especially like coming up to the 2020s, Canada and the US had benefited enormously from NAFTA. The development in Mexico was not principally, though, even driven by American companies offshoring, but a lot of offshore investments seeking to entry into the North American market. And even today, this is a fear, right? So there are very strong provisions against letting Chinese car makers into the North American market, and especially not setting up factories in the United States. But there have already been some overtures to set up those factories in Mexico and then sell those cars into the US market at very low cost compared to, say, Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors into the American market. And from my understanding, Chinese cars are really, really, really good. So, that's a big fear, especially for Tesla, by the way, because Chinese electric cars are apparently way nicer than Teslas. So there's huge fear. Elon Musk, no doubt, part of his chummy relationship with Donald Trump, I assume, is about protecting Tesla as a thing of value. The U.S., because it's an absolute beast, right? Of the three economies in NAFTA and now the USMCA or whatever, the CUSMA, or I don't know, depends on who you talk to. They use a different acronym for it. Often ignores NAFTA rules and favors its own producers. BC has long had issues with its softwood lumber industry, and as you probably have guessed, Trump slapping tariffs on Canada, as he is threatening to do, would violate our most recent trade agreement, USMCA. But the US just kind of often ignores any kind of arbitration rules that come from the body that adjudicates NAFTA and the USMCA, because it's like, we're so big, who cares? We're not paying you any fines. Hello. If you get too close to the sensor on that door, it just opens. Okay. USMCA was renegotiated principally along the lines that you had to do more manufacturing in the US, and that more places in Mexico, didn't care about Canada as much, had to at least pay the US minimum wage to try and stop some of those job losses. Could it be said? I'm going to answer that next time. Okay, because I want to do one more slide and then I'll let you go. Okay, I will get through globalization next time. GDP growth since 1993, and you can see this ends in 2012, but all three, Canada, the US, and Mexico, have all grown, and they've grown faster than the relative rate of the OECD, right? So that's the basically like 20 leading capitalist democracies, part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So Canada, the US, and Mexico have all outgrown the OECD average, which includes a lot of Western Europe. Okay, let's leave it there. I'm going to write Western Europe, but you can pack up if you want. We'll pick this up with another short video to start the next class, and we'll finish off globalization, and we'll be off to the races for midterm number 1. All right, we will see you on Wednesday. I love those tables. They're just the best. Clack, 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 clack. Oh, good times.